Jedediah Evans.
Yeah.
Jedediah middle name?
Daniel William.
Daniel William
Yeah,
Evans.
yeah.
I think you are the only Jed I know apart from Jed Bartlett of the West Wing.
Who's Josiah?
Who's Josiah? Okay.
Inauthentic.
Nobody is like you. Jedediah is a biblical name, to my knowledge?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it means, like most male biblical names, it means loved by God.
Yeah, sure. That is the general thing, yeah.
Yeah, but it was the name of Solomon that was given to him by Nathan the prophet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. I mean, I can say why I have a biblical name.
Please.
My dad was a minister, and he was a peculiar kind of minister. I think in another life he should have been a biblical scholar.
Okay.
But he spent some time in Israel in the 70s. He read in Hebrew and a few others, Assyrian phenotype and Greek. And yeah, he gave me that name and he taught me what to say to people who asked about it. So it was a name that I had to live up to. Yeah, I know where it's from in the Bible. I know its meaning. I know how to say it in Hebrew.
Wow.
But
Do
it
your
was...
siblings also have...
No.
Interesting. Just you.
No. Firstborn son.
Cool,
yeah.
cool. Okay.
I have an older sister, and she got Arwen in the middle of her name.
Okay.
So she got Lord of the Rings, and I got
Obscure.
wisest king in the Bible, man of many wives.
Wow. There's a few PKs, like our church pastors' kids in our congregation. Poor Anna is a double. Doesn't stand a chance.
Yeah.
What was it like? What was it like growing up in a family with a minister in the family?
Yeah. I've been talking to a bunch of people about this. It's one of those things that often people who haven't had anything to do with church find very curious, because it's like you're a sort of special breed, right? You're not just someone who went to church.
Christian. Yeah.
And of course, I then became a teacher's kid, and I went to the school where my dad taught, so I got lathered with it. But my dad studied Bible college later in life, so he was a electrical engineer, and then he was a teacher, and then he retrained at Morling Bible College when I was about 4, and so we would do trips up to Morling, and then when I turned 5, we left the Shire, and I'm sorry, that's done now. But
it's a safe space, Jed. It's all good.
Yeah. We were in Waterfall, so it's really the rectal end of the Shire.
I don't know why that's not on their tourism ad.
Good start. So then we moved to Carlingford, which was my dad did a student placement in Heathcote, Engadine, and then we went to Carlingford Baptist, and we lived in a manse on the site of the church, which I think is maybe a different experience again for people who are the children of ministers, because people would come to our home all the time. Our home was kind of an extra space within the church, so our house shared the same car park as the church.
Right.
And so we would have both people from church, but we would also have people who would wander off the street, and if no one was in the church building, they would come to our home. Okay. So I guess the experience of being a pastor's kid is interesting for me because I have a totally different experience from my siblings. So my sister would describe it utterly differently from me. So she found it kind of a surveillance state. I think it's different being a young woman as a pastor's kid.
Sure. With people coming to your house.
With people coming to your house, with people scrutinizing your behavior, with people thinking that you had to be a certain kind of person. My brother went into kind of very intense ministry of a sort of mission variety in a kind of more conservative movement and has had a lot of transformation and change since that time. I had the kind of in-between space, which was that I really loved it, actually. And maybe this is hopeful for you.
Yeah, thank you for letting me know that, What did you love?
I loved owning a space. I think when you're a young kid, having space that belongs to you that isn't your home is really amazing. So the church was mine. And that's no small thing. I think that young people are typically kind of given spaces, but you don't really have free roam. And so I think I had a sense that in the same way that my life kind of belonged to other people in a more public way, that also came with benefits, which was, well, I could just kind of use spaces that weren't mine as if they were mine. I also really came to love being kind of called into people's lives in really complicated moments. I spent a lot of time in like mental health hospitals with my dad, because he would, be called suddenly to go and visit someone in crisis, and I would just come along with him, or driving people who were living rough down to a train station, or having people, demand things of my dad and see that as a kind of normal thing that was appropriate. And so I think I loved that because I love feeling like I think it's terrifying if the world is just for you. Like it's genuinely particularly if you're a kind of young, sensitive kid like I was, it was nice to sort of belong to something that you were part of as opposed to you're the main character.
Did you also, though, feel any sense of pressure of being the minister's kid?
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Extra Christian,
yeah,
that kind of stuff?
I don't think extra Christian, because my dad, like God love him, he was a very intellectual person first and foremost. And so I think he wasn't very good at demanding kinds of character. So I have other friends who are pastors' kids who it's like, you couldn't watch TV, you couldn't, you weren't allowed to go to the movies, you weren't allowed to use certain kinds of language, and that just wasn't the case with my dad.
Okay.
That being said, if you tracked the choices that I made in my life, you would say that guy has felt the pressure to do everything and be the good guy.
So maybe it was a more subtle...
Yeah, it's hard to know. I don't know if we ever know whether like something is latent in our disposition or whether it's a thing that's kind of been created in us. And it's so much a part of me now that I don't know if I can kind of reflect on it as like, oh, that was pressure that I felt. Because now it's like, well, that's who I like being that person.
Yeah.
But I think it suited only one of us. Yeah. So and I think I should say it's terrible to be a pastor's wife in the 90s when it was predominantly male pastors with, I think that's been a thing I've reflected upon more. Being a pastor's kid is one thing. I think it's a whole other thing to have been a kind of caregiver with, kind of subjugated to the seeming kind of higher work or the calling of the church.
Yeah.
And so I think that's more when I think about the family and who had a harder time of it. I actually think my mum probably had the harder time. Yeah.
Okay. So the church space was almost as much part of your home as home was, you were saying. And obviously church worship was a big part of your childhood and youth. Do you remember a time when faith clicked into place, or was it just kind of a thing that was always there? Yeah,
I feel like I'm going to refer to, there's a book by Frederick Buechner. I don't know if you guys like Buechner. Or know who he is, or know that that's how his name is pronounced. But it's like, oh, Buechner, yeah. No, so he talks about like the signs of faith often are really peculiar and personal and not very impressive. Yeah. It's just like, oh, I was outside and I saw trees moving in a certain way and I felt peace in my spirit and I went, oh no, I know that God's real.
Yeah.
And I think, like for me, there was a moment. There was a friend of mine, his sister passed away when we were in, I guess year 2 or year 3, and it was a really tragic circumstance. And he in fact ended up he wrote Oceans, so he went on to be like a Hillsong guy. But his sister died, and we were really good friends. And I remember weeping on the couch and never having wept before as a young person, and feeling like. Not feeling God's presence and peace, but feeling like I didn't realize I was connected to somebody that I didn't really... She was an older sister, she was just sort of in the world, but there was something in that moment that felt like I belonged to other people, and that clarified a whole lot of stuff that I had heard and experienced on the daily about what God... the kind of presence of God stitching us together in terms of us being in community with others. And so it wasn't like God revealing himself, it was God kind of reminding me that I wasn't my own person. And then, honestly, it was becoming a youth leader, which is, again, you think back on the things that you said as a youth leader and you maybe cringe at times. And, but I remember being a youth leader and having a young woman who is now a very dear friend of ours who wrote a song for our wedding 10 years ago. She came into the church, and I remember leading her and having her become this incredibly like ebullient, faithful, generous person. And it felt like magic and nothing that I had anything to do with. And that was as a much, like I was a kind of 17-year-old, you know. And I remember that felt like this moment where my faith shifted from just like a confident knowledge that God was a thing to being like, oh, God doesn't even like need me, but he involves me, or God involves me, they involve me in the work. And that was a kind of like a moment I think that my faith matured from being a thing that happened inside of me to being a thing that happened in other people. So those are, but then honestly, it's just standing in a storm, you know, or having a thing happen that was unexpected and explainable in other ways, but just felt native to explain as God's presence. And they would feel super daggy to say to people, because people would be like, that's not God, that's just X or Y. But that was how God worked on my spirit, yeah.
And have there been moments in your life where you've gone, I don't know if it is God. Like, I don't know if there is a God, or I don't know. Have you had moments where you've...
Yeah. I was thinking about this because this was kind of, you know, when it feels appropriate to, because doubt is like a thing that humanizes us and connects us with other people, and it feels absolutely necessary to share in moments of doubt. And I have definitely had doubt about the goodness of God, I think.
Okay.
Or about God's like ability to act or to change or to intervene.
Sure.
I don't think I had moments really of saying there was, because I think I just didn't have a good enough answer for the alternative. And I think for me, I really, and I went through the whole like young atheist movement and read all those books and, you know, felt affronted as a teenage boy, like it was directed toward me. But I just never felt it very compelling because I think I'm a very gentle person, and that always felt very kind of like militaristic and masculine. Like, you know, if you don't believe in God, that means you're a strong, smart guy. And I didn't want to be that. No. And so I think I was more like, well, I would accept God as a force or as a presence before I accepted God as absent. I was happy to kind of accept God in the most nebulous terms, but I definitely think it happens to me pretty regularly. You know, the work that I do, like going into prison spaces, and we'll probably talk about that at some point, but there are just conversations that you have that you think, if I was put on the spot now and said, how is God at work in that moment, I would utterly flounder. Totally. I would have no words to say. Totally. And I don't know if that's so much doubt in the existence of God as doubt in like the relevance of God.
Yeah, that is a different thing.
The usefulness of God in those moments. Yeah.
I'm keen for Luck to hear a bit about the study that you've done and the work that you do. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, okay. I am so I know at least John, there are other people here who are like, work at Sydney University, you know, just a bunch of cerebral eggheads. That's not fair. That John seems like a way nicer guy.
Perfectly nice person.
I've been to his lab. Like, that guy's a smart guy. So I was going to be a teacher. That was my dad ended up being a teacher. And I think that's
he went from ministry.
From ministry back, actually. So, I mean, that's relevant. I should probably share that. Yeah. We experienced a massive like division in the church where my dad was pushed out. Oh, wow. And the Baptist Association didn't know how to look after associate pastors because it was like the whole mechanism was senior pastors run churches. And so just he had no one and nothing. And my high school principal reached out to him and said, have you thought about coming back into education? And didn't interview him so much as invite him in and say, how you doing? And then gave him a job. Wow. And then he worked there for the next 25 years. Yeah. And so that was, so I experienced that school in a way that went, the way that you care for people is you become a teacher. And so I went to Macquarie University. Any alumni from Macquarie? I don't know. Yeah, okay, cool. It used to be really hard to get to. There's a train there now, which is really annoying. But I went there... Back in my day, man. Yeah. I went there and I studied a Bachelor of Arts, and then I had a teacher who was like, maybe you should do an honours. And then I did an honours, and then they were like, you should go for the medal and then maybe study overseas. And I thought, that's a cool idea. I should do that. And then I didn't get it. And then later found out that it's because they forgot to submit the paperwork, my department. Cool. They told me 3 years later, my supervisor waited a long enough time for the sting to pass. And I'm really grateful that didn't happen.
Why is that?
I just think I would have been such an ass if I'd gone, you know.
That's a good avoiding of.
Yeah,
Yep.
I don't know. Maybe that's not true. And there are decent people who go to like elite universities.
Yeah, sure.
But there's something about being a younger person and having an ambition to do that because it marks you as something, like it marks your esteem within the group, as distinct from, I really want to work with that person, or they're doing really exciting things, and I just didn't have that language yet. And so I didn't do that. I just worked for a year in IT for some reason.
Wow, okay.
Which taught me that I didn't want to be in IT.
Good. Yep.
No hate on IT. I was kind of a glorified salesperson.
Yep.
Which I was really good at, and I thought, I can't do this because I don't want to be good at something that I don't believe in. And then I started a PhD, like all people who start PhDs basically, which is a sense of, I want to test the limits of myself, but also I'm not entirely sure what else there is for me to do. And that turned out to be a really wonderful choice. So I did a PhD in kind of English literature, and I got to do some of that in the United States as well, which was really amazing in the pre-Trump era. And I kind of met my dearest friend in that time. We both had the same supervisor, who was a mean man, like an Oxford Don, just a really nasty guy, and just an android. I used to think of him as an android, as a kind of like input-output kind of thing.
Yep.
Give him work and he would generate response. I invited him to my wedding, he didn't come, like that kind of guy. He was sad when his cat died, and then I suddenly went like, oh, you're a person.
You have feelings?
It changed everything for me about him. But he was we kind of bonded over this shared challenge with a person who had these 2 young men who were kind of sussing out who we wanted to be in the world, and were, I think, very similar dispositionally, kind of weirdly so. Like if you meet him, people will be like, oh, that's like you've just split cells and there he is. But it also meant that we kind of did this journey of faith together as academics.
Okay.
And that was glorious. That's when I read all the things how I believe and think about God today. That's how I deepen my faith.
Particular authors that...
Yeah, lots of Catholics.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I would say.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, now I'm going to have to think on the spot about...
Phil Merchant has tuned his ears in.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's really when I started reading people like Henry Nouwen, and that's where I frame, like, all that idea of hospitality and welcoming the stranger came from that. I also started reading a lot about mysticism as well, and that, I think, made me feel comfortable with the notion that it was okay to experience God in ways that weren't intellectual and that kind of grounded faith in my body more than in my mind, which is a necessary step. And I started reading Brian Doyle, who is my patron saint, I would say. And since I've become a father, even more so. So I did my PhD. I kind of had a baptism, like Lewis says of George MacDonald. He had a baptism of imagination. Yep. And then I finished my PhD, and I just started teaching and working. And I don't know if this is other people's experience, but it turns out that when you finish something like a PhD, you just kind of get jettisoned, and then people don't tell you what you should do next. And thankfully I met Renee very soon after, I think basically when I graduated from my PhD. So like I was obviously excellent real estate at that point. I had no meaningful income, a completed PhD and no job.
And Renee was like, take me now.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I don't want to make people uncomfortable, but honestly, it was kind of like that. She was like, that's exactly what I'm after.
Love is love.
Love is love, right. Yeah. Oh, my God, yeah. Yes. And so it was around this time, basically very soon after we were married, I did the most the thing that you do in a movie when you're making a decision, which is I did a pros and cons list.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't think that way. I don't know if other people think that way. But I've been working in academia and doing this PhD. What are the things I care about? I care about people. Like, this is from when I grew up in church. I care about people. I care about community. I believe that most change happens in community and not in the public and not in interpersonal, but in this space where you are known and loved. And I went, I also love work that reaches people's hearts. And then I did the list of things that I was doing, and it was like, I'm driving to Wollongong for my morning class and then to Rydalmere for my afternoon class. I'm working at 5 universities in a week, and I'm teaching the worst stuff, interpersonal communication. Hopefully I'm good at it, I don't know. But teaching stuff that was being sunsetted, like they just needed to get rid of a unit, can this guy teach it? Teaching other people's material, and so I had another kind of moment of going, I'm not doing anything that I love to do. And not everyone has the opportunity to do what they love. I didn't have the opportunity to do what I loved, and I wasn't being remunerated. Yep. And so it was like, well, what can I lose, really? You can either kind of be unhappy doing a thing that also doesn't ultimately get you anywhere as well. I think, it would have been harder if I was sort of stayed in my IT sales job and got married and had to think about being a sensible person, but I was doing unsensible things like being an academic. And so I reached out to about 50 people, academics around Australia, whose work was doing good stuff. And I said, can you tell me how to do this? Which I'm really grateful to that version of myself that did that, because that's a bit of a weird thing to do. I would say anyone, by the way, who wants to make a change in their life, you should definitely reach out to people who are doing the thing that you're doing, but better than you. Mm-hmm. Because sometimes people will be incredibly encouraged by that when you say, I read this thing that you did and I loved it and I want to know how you do that. And a bunch of people didn't reply. A bunch of people were like, you seem like a nice guy. And that was it. And then someone called Marietta Martinovich, who won an Order of Australia last year, she replied and she said to me, I don't think I can say what she said because there are children in this church, but she basically said, if you're really interested in doing this, prove it.
Wow. And
she invited me to Geelong to go to Margate Prison to attend... Sorry.
It's all right. Take a moment.
I mean, what a kind of wild confidence to put in a person, but I think she thought I wasn't going to turn up, basically, because it was... And when I did turn up, she was like, like that. Yeah. And then she had a seat next to the head of the university she worked for. Yeah. And she said, well, you can sit here then. So it was this amazing... This amazing moment of faith. And then honor, where she's like, well, you did it, you turned up. And then she said, come and watch. And this was 2015, 2016, and she said, watch. And then I watched this parade of currently incarcerated people who had completed a university degree that she had run. Wow. And I wasn't just reaching out to people who were interested in prisons, I was reaching out to everybody, sure. Just sort of looking for touch points of going, that is where there's a need. And particularly where the arts is missing. There's lots of criminologists and there's lots of people who study law, but there's not a lot of people who have a particular skill. One of the skills I have is crying when I'm reading poetry, so that's a peculiar skill. But I turned up to this event and I saw these men who are in prison greens. They're not soft, gentle men necessarily, or some of them are. And I watched that graduation, and then I went, okay, I want to do this. And then she said, okay, let's do this. And then she came up with me to Sydney, and we did a big pitch to Western Sydney University, and they were excited, and we got a prison on board, which was insane. And we all sat, this was all of this work, and I was doing this all unpaid, but I'm like, it's going to happen, this is going to be amazing. And then we flew over someone from the States to do training. We booked accommodation. I developed course material. It took me about a year. And then about a week before the program started, Western Sydney University pulled all the funding. Ooh. because somebody in the central portfolio wanted funding for something they were doing, and so they said, we're going to cancel all projects until I get... It's just kind of internal politics, which is sadly very familiar in university world. And the prison said to me, well, can you do something while we're waiting? And so I said, okay. Yeah. And Marietta went back to Victoria, and I went into a prison in Western Sydney, so Parklea Prison, which was at the time run by a private company. It's a maximum security men's prison. It's a scary place. It's one of the worst prisons I've ever been involved in. And I went into a tiny little room with no custodial staff. Wow. And sat down in a room of men who had been told, someone is coming to teach you something. And then I did that for 8 more years.
So it was one-on-one?
Not one-on-one, it was 1 on 10, 1 on 15.
And you would teach classes?
And I would teach classes, and I would honestly, I came in with, there are things that I love, and I want to share those things that I love with you. And I had a sense that maybe the real gift of education is like seeding the possibility that somebody else has something that they can also share, that they also love, and that watching someone unabashedly love a thing without irony or cynicism might be the thing that would be like this kind of revelatory opening moment. And that was, again, if you want to ask about my faith in God, the fact that those classes worked. I think most of my life has been spent becoming the right person for a thing I'm already doing, which is maybe like the reverse of just like patriarchal culture. It's just like we let men do whatever they want, and then mostly they fail to do that, and then every now and then you don't fail, and then we celebrate that. But honestly, I feel like why am I here is mainly my mode of inquiry. But I became kind of gentler, and I trusted more in kindness, and I saw the profound capacity of like hospitality of the sort which is, I think you have something, you're a guest and you have something to share, and I am a guest here in your home and you're welcoming me here. And it was just honestly like this, what can I find to share and to read and to do with people that revolves around that? And it became... many, many years later, one of the men in the workshop, who was actually formerly a police officer, who had just, gotten involved in drug abuse and then became he'd just shifted. And he said he'd been 9 years a police officer and 9 years like a crim, as he would say. And so he'd kind of tipped over toward being more familiar in a prison than outside it. Sure. And he said, we should call it thinking outside the green, which is the green is what men wear.
Wow.
And he said, this feels like the only time we get to not be in this kind of prison mentality. The yard mentality is what people would say, where it's all about striving and manipulating, and prisons function by taking away people's options, even for goodness, which is the stupidest part of prisons. I appreciate taking away people's freedom to do harm, but to do good is a cruelty. And so I think the classroom became this opportunity for people to imagine other things from the prison space. And so it almost doesn't matter then what you teach. Mm-hmm. It matters your disposition, your character, your care, your willingness, and then your invitation, I think. And so that was totally miraculous. And that was all because of one person who I should say now I invited to be on my research team because she's always had trouble getting like money from the research grants because they don't believe that you should look after people who are in prison. And so I spent a lot of time trying to do that. And when we finally kind of got some traction with that, I immediately reached out to her and said, I don't care what you do, but you're like on the team. And that's been an incredible like full circle 10 years later moment.
Have there been moments in the last 10 years when the joy and satisfaction of the really ministry that you get to do feels inordinately weighed the other way by the injustice of the system and the pain of seeing the brokenness of a system and the societal kind of around it?
Yeah. I mean, Are people okay with stories? I feel like I'm mindful that I'll tell some stories that might be quite confronting for people. I mean, the most recent example is an example that I have prayed for. So I don't know if people retain what other people pray about, but there's been a person who I've been working with in Villawood, and in fact, some folks in the back of our church here have been present while he's been on a Zoom link from detention. His name's Cameron. I met Cameron maybe 2020, 2021. He came into Parkley, and I was in a wing called the Drug and Alcohol Recovery Wing. I've written an article about this, which it's going to come out this year, and it's the first time that I've been able to describe that wing because I'm not working there anymore because State Corrections took over last year. But it's exactly what you would expect. There's so many doors and kind of like airlocks separating the inside world from the outside. And so when I would meet with the men in there, I would be always mindful that like I was leaving with a pair of keys on my waistband. But Cameron was the first guy that I met with who I felt had a genuine hope that he would meet me on the outside too. Parkley's a remand centre, so you don't even know what your sentence is going to be when you're in there. And people can spend time unsentenced for up to 2 or 3 years, which is wild, sometimes longer than the sentence they would ultimately receive. And if you're on remand, you don't get services, you don't get criminogenic programs, you don't get health opportunities because they only provide those to sentenced men and women. And so I was the only thing going in that wing. And so I'm not imagining I was some amazing thing. I was kind of like the option. It was me or nothing. And Cameron came in and we immediately clicked. His crime was an awful crime in its familiarity. He was a drug user, had a family, has 5 children, and he was using heroin, got into the car as he had done for the last 10 years, and except this time he had an accident where he fell asleep. And when he woke having pinned a young teenage boy against the wall of a service station who died on the scene. And he has teenage children as well. And that was his first time into prison. He'd spent time in juvenile centers as a young guy, his first time in prison. And we connected over like parenting, over, I had my first son, I had Hallam when I was working with Cameron. He would draw and stencil art for men's children. So he would do artworks for them. I have a magazine called Paper Chain that I run with a formerly incarcerated guy, and he published poetry in there. He would read his poetry every week to kind of set the tone of the class for people. And so when he was released, it turned out that he had never received permanent citizenship, even though he arrived in Australia when he was 2. And so he went straight to Villawood under this character test law that we have in Australia, which is one of the great injustices of our legal system at present. And then he's been in Villawood for the last 2 years. And I've been praying because I went to his hearing and I spoke to the judge or the magistrate and I spoke to the lawyers and I gave an account of his character over the 4 or 5 years that I'd known him. And he messaged me just after Christmas because they held him over Christmas, even though the hearing was well before. And then his plea was rejected. And it was like all of this time, all of this energy, all of my energy, and I don't want to say my promise because I never make a promise that it's all going to be okay, but you kind of think there's a certain energy outlay that will just have a result. Like it's just like if I just do enough good, something will change. And he was the most obvious case. He had a family, his wife turned up to all the hearings, he has responsibilities here, he has a job, he never committed a crime before he was an Australian, We are responsible for the things that he's done in as much as we didn't care or didn't support. He's on our watch, It's a law that was designed for like people who ran drug syndicates and then came here as adults. Yeah. And yet, it was just like that, one fell swoop. And I think he's going to give up. He's been fighting it for so long, and I think he's just going to give up. And I don't know what that will mean for him or his family or for his children. And those things happen. I had another young woman that I was working with, Paige, so articulate, so eloquent, so interesting. We ran a program at Dilwinia, which is a maximum security women's prison, the largest in Australia. She wrote maybe 100 pages of work, poetry, writing, essays. I employed her when she was released to work with a unit that I run at Sydney University, a faculty unit, where she gave like personal testimony about the challenges of the system. And I was like, this is amazing. This is the story that you hope for. And then I reached out to her to do it again. And she lives in Wagga. She was there with someone who'd also been incarcerated. She'd gone through her parole period, but then she'd had a stroke from an acquired brain injury that she'd received from her partner, who had tried to set her on fire. And she'd been arrested in that altercation. And it was like, she was doing better in prison than in the post-release space. And you feel responsible.
Of course.
Because you set up the conditions where someone feels hope, where someone feels seen, that you know their name, you don't know their number, you don't know them by their surname, you know their name, you know their children's names. And then the number of variables, the amount that life is opposed to people's thriving when they have lived the kinds of lives that take them through the criminal justice system. And I think often we're so wooed by the story of success, the person who starts a business after they're released and works with people, that we use the limit case as evidence that we don't need to change anything in the system. Mm-hmm. If they can do it, why can't you, right? Mm-hmm. In fact, there was the former head of the former secretary of the Liberal Party came into Parklea, his Tanya Plibersek's husband, came into Parklea and met with the men that I worked with, and he told his story about how he was a heroin user and he got arrested and he was sent to prison, and kind of look at him now. And I reached out to him 10 times and I was like, let's work together, let's work together, let's work together. And then eventually his secretary emailed me back like ashamedly, and she said, I don't think he's gonna talk to you, I think you should give up.
Stop, yeah.
And he came from extreme wealth and privilege. And he had every possible support and opportunity to help him. And the story that he tells is a story of personal striving and personal success. And in reality, it's the story of situational privilege that so many people cannot count on. And so I think the wavering happens in those moments. And people would say that's a risk. Don't know people. Like, run the program, don't know the people. Sure. And I think that's the whole point, is to create community. And unfortunately, community breaks our heart all the time. And that's a good thing, because our hearts are broken together and not on our own. And I think if I was just doing this on my own, it would be crushing. In as much as it's illuminating and luminous and full of hope and positivity and new opportunity, I think that you have to do it with other people, and you really have to be committed to the fact that this might take your whole life. And that's okay, because if there's no quick fix. And I think, honestly, becoming a parent has helped me in a lot of ways with prison work, because it's taught me on the one hand that people go on being good people even when they do heinous things, and that people rely on them. Yep. And that we have separated mothers and fathers and caregivers from the people that are dependent on them, and then we brutalize them, and then we return them to community and ask why they don't succeed. Yep. And so I think just as a parent, there's been this deep solidarity that I felt with people, of just the things that they're not permitted to do. But also I think it's taught me the long game vision, and I am so itching for the change to happen fast. And I want people who will blow up the system around me to do some of those necessary fast changes. And I am committed to being the person who will just do it in the slow and heartbreaking way, because I have the resources of friends and family and community that I can kind of fall back on and then be restored by. Yeah, I feel like that. I feel I am obliged to do this work, because I don't feel like it's destroyed me because of the great privilege and opportunity that I have. And I don't want to ask people who have gone through the system to then fix it. And I think that's often our impulse. You've got lived experience, it's your job to solve it. And it's like, I think that's true in some extent. But then on the other hand, it's like, no, you have a right to live your life. It's us who have to do the changing. So, yeah.
And your commitment to the power of community in some ways drew you to this space. Do you feel up for talking about the Marrickville story?
Yeah.
And how you came in here?
Yeah. Is this okay? I feel like I've been talking a long time. So Renee and I, we weren't going to like a brick and mortar church for a while. I think that's maybe everybody's story, almost everybody's story in this community, like this, the kind of experience of institutional church. But we were part of the Baptist, my dad was a Baptist minister, I was a Baptist my whole life. Card-carrying Baptist. Yep. I mean, I did I preached, I was a youth group leader, I did morning service, evening service, worship band. I was on committees and councils and, you know, I even worked for the Baptist Union for a period of time when I was at H3O and they needed a pastor to cover. And I was like, all right, I will do it. Which is a weird experience. But we met some wonderful people, Kate and John, who were up from Victoria, who had been asked to shutter Small Boat Big C, if you guys know that church. It's in Fairlight, I think. It was Mike Frost's church, who was a bit of a dude.
Still is a bit of a dude.
Not my dude.
No.
Hashtag NMB, NMD. Well, I have an idea for the B actually, but I won't say it. But he was not my cup of tea. He was kind of missional church and community, and he'd set up a church, as so many people with personalities do, and then left it. And then when you leave it, it dies because it was contingent on you and not on the community itself. And so we had these friends who came up and they helped shutter the church, which was not what they thought they were doing. And then they had an incredibly difficult pregnancy where they had to have ultrasounds since week 20. Their daughter didn't grow from that point. And Renee and I met them, and it was like this forged in the fires kind of stuff. Sure. We were in the NICU over Christmas with them. And then the Baptist Union said to them, listen, or the Baptist Association said to them, listen, would you consider planting a church in the inner west? And they said, kind of like last ditch, we came up to Sydney, let's try it.
Sure.
And then Renee and I said, well, we love you, so we'll do it with you. And we kind of enabled it, I think, in many ways. Like, I think they wouldn't have done it without us. And then we went to Marrickville, which is where we live now. This is not a good story, I should say. The Baptist Association doesn't come off well, which is that we were there and then COVID hit. And they had a building, and Kate is an urban designer, and we did the plans, and we're like, here is how Marrickville Church can support community, can do affordable housing, can create spaces for community activity, can actually resource a building that hasn't been used for 20 years. And the church was like, I think we should sell it, actually. And sorry about the whole promise of church community and church planning, but this feels troubling to us. And then the Baptist Association said, also, because you guys are a new plant, we'd really like you to sign on to this new thing we're doing, which is we're not letting like any queer people be married in our church communities, if that's okay. And honestly, like, we weren't a church that was going to be an issues church. I don't think we were interested in we were just sort of like, we're going to be local and planted, and we didn't need to have perspectives on stuff, in part because it's the inner west. Yeah. And it's like, you don't need a position, like, that's an insane position to take in the inner west. It's like, if people hear that about your church, they're not coming to your church. And we went, oh my gosh, we can't sign on to this. And so all the seed funding, all the promise suddenly, and the building suddenly evaporated. I'm really crushing this it was over years. And so we kind of kept a house church going for a while at Kate and John's, and then Kate and John, I think, just got lonely and got sad, and they left, which broke our hearts. Sure. And then we said, well, we'll continue doing it in our home. And then we had 2 children, and that got really hard. Sure. And then we went, I think this has to end. And I don't know if anyone has ever been involved in ending something which at the beginning had so much hope and optimism and the reason that it fails is not anything of your doing.
Totally.
But it was a very kind of mournful experience, I think. And honestly, Leichhardt was, when we lived in Drummoyne many years ago, Renee had come here as a kind of possible space in the inner west. And she was like, it was cool, you know? And then that was kind of what was said about it.
Yeah.
And then, but it was like, it's in a building. You guys have a building. And there's something about buildings, right? There's something like, oh, it's still a church.
Yeah.
And we weren't quite ready to come back into a building. And then in all of this like breakdown and kind of sadness and separation and saying goodbye, not only to a church, but to friends, to a vision, to an ambition, even to a thing that had happened in our own home, which was a kind of holy thing. I don't even remember when we started coming, but it was just a sort of like knee-jerk reaction to be like, we should go. Mm-hmm. And it was really the best decision that we have made as a family, I think, because we had these tiny humans and we thought they're getting older, and I wanted them to have that experience that I had when I was a pastor's kid, not to be a pastor's kid. I'm not going to be a pastor. I'm not going up for ministry. This is not like an announcement moment. I mean, never say never, but I've said never for a long time. I'm a pastor's kid, remember that.
It's true.
We have a special never card to play. But I had that moment of going, I want my children to feel like they're not the center of the universe. Honestly, I know that might sound mean to people, but it's like it's the healthiest thing in the world in my mind for a tiny human to belong to other people and to owe them something and to be owed something by them, multi-generationally, you know, across all sense of identity and disposition, color, ethnicity, sexuality. I want them to be people who know people and are known by people. And so coming here, it's suddenly like both of those things happened at once. I think I was more reticent than Renee was, to be honest, just because I was like the secretary of that other church, and my habit is to just like do all the things.
Sure.
And I have felt weird not doing all the things here,
yeah.
but I've also not been able to do all the things, and that's been a really humbling experience of being like, I'll do that, and then not being able to do that. I've always been able to do the thing, and this has been a period of our lives with, you know, Renee going through some serious health challenges over this time, and just raising children who are themselves, and my dad has gone into aged care and becoming his power of attorney and looking after him, and it's been like, oh, I don't have capacity.
No, and that's okay.
And I'm running these prison programs, and it's like, oh, maybe that is ministry.
Yep.
Yeah, and I also have a job at the uni, but I barely talk about that. Like it's by the by.
Cool.
Yeah.
1 or 2 questions? What are you curious about? Yeah.
I would say like the point where I felt most, this is maybe obvious. You know how you learn obvious things? Like you can be a smart person and you learn obvious things that other people are like, mate, your thinking got in the way of you learning that, which was that, can I say about like postpartum for you, is that okay? So when Hallam was born, Renee had a very, very hard postpartum period. Like scary hard, and that's the time when you're like, that's when I connect with God, right? It's literally the opposite thing. And I didn't reach out to friends, I didn't reach out to community, because I went into like, I've got to be here and I've got to be present and I'm going to be the one who will be unwavering in all of this. And so like the hardest time in my recent life was the time when I leaned on God, where I prayed the least, where I read the least, where I listened and worshipped the least. It was like I couldn't think. And I realized in that experience, it's been very illuminating for me, because I realized like how much of my connection to God has been like not cerebral, but kind of like intellectually satisfying, you know? I know something and then I see how God is present in that. And so when flourishes is when life is going well, because that's when you see stuff, and suddenly when your eyes are shrouded by pain, by fear. And I went, that's the reverse probably of what I need to be doing. And so I would say that in my work in prison spaces, I think honestly I mentioned Brian Doyle. Brian Doyle is a great writer. He's very funny, very faithful, and also just like very crass and like not kind of apologetic about all of his fears and failings. And I realized that, you can maintain belief that doesn't look like kind of a strong confidence. It can just be like a lifeboat, a very thin thread of possibility that maybe things will get better. And so that, I think through reading that work and then through having children who made demands on me and made me realize that patience and kindness and softness and gentleness are actually virtues, and they're maybe like the most muscular virtues you can have as a person in the world. That was when I sort of reset some of that faith. And then since that time, I would say, I would say the relationship with God has flourished even as things have been difficult and hard. I know you have a question that you ask at the end.
Go for it.
And I'm going to kind of, Rads was like, what's a question that you would ask God? And I thought about this so much, way too much. And I remembered a story. Again, this is Frederick Buechner. He was like 20 years old. I should say he's like a writer and a preacher, and he lived forever. He's only just died recently. Written 1,000 books. And he talks about going to a monastery in New York City to ask a question of this very famous person. And he arrives there, and they're having a week of silence. And then the only person who's there to answer guests' questions had a stroke the day before. And he describes their words as the way that rain lashes against a moving car's windscreen. So he couldn't understand what they were saying. And his revelation in that is the questions that he had at the core of who he was were answered with silence, until eventually silence was not the thing that was stopping the question. It was the answer itself. And so weirdly, I think I've become much less demanding of God to tell me why things are, and much more alert to the fact that I think I basically know the kind of person I'm called to be in the witness of Christ and in the vision of community that I have. And so kind of doing this work has been I think this is what I should be doing, actually. Yeah, and so then the relationship with God is kind of, in a way, it's no, this is what I'm meant to be doing. So I'm living in some sort of way, not perfectly, obviously, but yeah. And so I think I in some ways I ask less of God, even though I have so many more questions about reality and the way that the world is. It's well, okay, I can change some of those things in my action, or I can call other people to change those things. So maybe the answer is to why is there suffering or something like that? Is why am I okay with suffering? That's a better question for me to ask in my work and life. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
One more? Yeah, Catherine.
What would you say to your younger self?
Yeah. You know what? I feel like I would be so kind to him. I think that I would say you don't know everything, for sure. I knew everything, which is awesome. Doesn't it suck when you stop knowing everything? That was such... and I would also definitely say be gentler to yourself, because you can't learn gentleness to others until it's that's the Henry Nouwen says you can't be a good host if you're not at home in yourself. And I think you have this yearning to be the kind of person that people feel comfortable with, and then you have this deep striving anxiousness at the core of who you are, and it's you're not at home in yourself, man. I see that so often. It's what, even in a meeting context, it's why do these meetings feel so terrible? It's because everyone is anxious. And so I think I would say to that self, you don't need to try so hard. You don't know everything. and maybe read Brian Doyle now. That would have saved me a lot of time. I'd probably say, like, there's a few relationships I would warn him off as well. Like, let's be honest. That's a story for another time. It's just like, it's not worth it. It's not worth it. But yeah, definitely just that kind of generous impulse to say, rather than you're an idiot, which I think is I don't think I would have responded well to that. I'd be like, you don't know everything, you don't need to, and you're okay how you are. Stop striving. Yeah. Yeah, I think I would tell that to my 39-year-old self at some point as well. Like, let's be honest. I'm thrilled at the idea that I'll be able to have some wisdom about that. Unfortunately, not right now.
Your incredible work in the prison system reminded me of the Romero prayer. As we finish, I'm going to ask you to read it for us.
Sure.
Is that all right?
Yeah.
I'll get it for you.
Do I say the title as well?
Sure.
Okay. Prophets of a future not our own. It helps now and then to step back and take the long view. The kingdom is not only beyond our efforts, it's even beyond our vision. We accomplish in our lifetime only a fraction of the magnificent enterprise that is God's work. Nothing we do is complete, which is another way of saying that the kingdom always lies beyond us. No statement says all that could be said. No prayer fully expresses our faith. No confession brings perfection. No pastoral visit brings wholeness. No program accomplishes the church's mission. No set of goals and objectives includes everything. This is what we are about. We plant the seeds that one day will grow. We water the seeds already planted, knowing that they hold future promise. We lay foundations that will need further development. We provide yeast that produces effects far beyond our capabilities. We cannot do everything. And there is a sense of liberation in realizing that. This enables us to do something and to do it well. It may be incomplete, but it is a beginning, a step along the way, an opportunity for the Lord's grace to enter and do the rest. We may never see the end results, but that is the difference between the master builder and the worker. We are workers, not master builders, ministers, not messiahs. We are prophets of a future, not our own.
Amen.
Amen.
Please join me in thanking Jed Evans.
Thanks, guys. Thanks.